Good morning, afternoon or evening everybody. Welcome to part 9 of this Panther 44 series and part 2 of the diorama build phase. To go back and watch the tank build or the foundations of the diorama being laid, you can use the link above. This time out, we are going to start filling in the details of the diorama ready for paint. We are going to add filler to finish the road details, add grout and wall texture, build a roof for the arch and add the grass elements. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. The first thing on the list is a spot of filling. This process will fill in the gaps between the road and the wall, fill the deep cracks in the road, add the grouting to the bricks, and create grass banks. For this, I am using your everyday multi-purpose filler. I got this big tub from Amazon for around £4. This stuff for me is a staple item when building dioramas. You can see here I'm using the filler to create a raised bank against the wall, of which I will add grass and plants later on. I am also using small amounts of filler to fill the deep cracks in the road. I don't want to completely fill these cracks and ruin the texture, just enough so it doesn't look like the whole road is collapsing. I also cover the areas where bricks are showing. This will act like a grouting. Once a small area is covered in filler, I use a small wet sponge to take off the excess and smooth down any peaks left by the palette knife. The step using the sponge is where you have the most control over the outcome. Apologies for the crap view in this clip. I'll do better next time. Next, I am going to get some track marks into my road. I add some filler using my palette knife, wet the area with a sponge and press in the spare set of rubber band tracks. I keep lifting and pressing the tracks to give the appearance of multiple track paths. The effect is subtle, but enough to see once dried. That is the general method to the process. Now it's a case of going around the entire diorama, filling and smoothing as I go. You can see here with the filling of the road details, I am fairly rough with the application, then work with the wet sponge to remove the surface layer to reveal the cracks. I add some more track and tire marks next, adding a fair amount of filler in areas and again pressing in the rubber band tracks. I also have this old wheel from a previous project, which I roll on the filler to create tire tracks. I am not going ham with this process, as I don't want to completely cover the cracks and bumps. Next up, it's the grass bank. This is a simple one really, just adding a good chunk of filler over the angled cut I have made. I want this surface to be quite bumpy, so I deliberately leave it quite rough. Again, I get a wet sponge and start smoothing some of the sharp peaks in the filler whilst adding a bit of texture. Most of this will be covered in grass, but I just want an uneven base to work from. Now, for the rear area of the diorama, the plan here is to create a small dirt track that's been used sporadically by jeeps and small vehicles. I put a bit more filler down than I did with the road, as I want it to be fairly bumpy and look unused. I whip out the trusty old wheel to add some prints again, rolling it back and forward until a fair few tracks have been made. Next, I add a bit more filler to the center, then smooth with a sponge. I will add grass to this part of the track later on. The final few stages of the top area are just adding the 2 grass areas next to the dirt road and grouting the rest of the bricks. I treat the grass areas as I did the bank earlier on, making a bumpy smooth surface for the grass. The bricks are even easier. Simply apply a decent amount and remove the excess with a sponge. You get a lot of playing time with the filler before it dries, so there's no real rush here, so long as you are working in sections. That is the main bulk of the filling done. The last thing that needs doing is finishing the edge of the base. My old boss used to say, if you can't hide it, make a feature of it. And that's exactly what I am doing here. I'm going to edge it with the filler, like a cake, then go over it with a wet sponge to smooth the peaks and add a texture to it. This I will paint black towards the end of the project. And that's it. Filling stage complete. Just need to let it cure now for a good 24 hours or so. Next, it's time to add some texture to the wall. For this, I'm going to use an isopropyl alcohol and Tamiya putty solution. I start by adding the putty to an old pot, then add the alcohol bit by bit and mixing them together until I get this putty sludge solution. Then it's just a case of stippling it all over the foam wall. This technique is twofold. First, it adds a nice texture to the plaster and bricks, but also it will stop the foam soaking up the paint later on. Being alcohol-based, it has a very fast drying time, so now we can move on and build the roof for the arch. The tiles I drew up in SketchUp and resin printed them. For the structure, I'm using some balsa wood strips. I cut the balsa wood into an oversized length. The excess I will use to construct the gables. The piece I had was way too chunky, so I cut it into 4 strips using a scalpel. Obviously, using the correct size to begin with would have been easier, but I didn't have any at the time in need. Once cut into the correct thickness, I measure against the wall and cut the strips to the correct length. Next, I draw out the required size for the gables. I take the overall size required, then use the strips to give me my gable size. Once drawn, I use as a guide to start cutting out the components. I started with the trusty CA Black by VMS to stick the 2 halves together. However, the drying time was too slow in this instance, so I whipped out the Loctite, which did the trick. With all the gables built, I can start constructing the roof structure. Again, using the Loctite, I glue the strips in place. It is a little fiddly and took a fair few goes, but once the glue cured, it was pretty sturdy. Next, I test fit the roof structure and tiles one last time before gluing it all down. Here again, I made the mistake of using the CA Black to try and glue down the tiles. I don't know why, but this stuff takes an age to dry when gluing wood, so I ended up removing it and using the Loctite instead. As I had the tiles off, this time I decided to first put filler down each side to fill the gap between the tiles and the wall. This also helped to hold the tiles in place while the glue dried. I do kind of make it up as I go along when building these things. I start with a plan, then veer on and off as I go. With the filler added, I finally super glue the tiles in place for the final time. If you are finding this video helpful, mildly entertaining and haven't done already, can I please ask you hit those like and subscribe buttons and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Every click of the mouse really makes a difference. Thank you. The final pieces to add are the top caps, again drawn and 3D printed by myself. For the broken side of the wall, I simply snap the top cap to size. The resin is very brittle, so gives it a nice jagged edge. I don't use any glue on these pieces. I just simply add filler and press them into place. I clean up the edges with a palette knife and remove the excess with a wet sponge. And that is the building phase of both the wall and the diorama complete. With the building work complete, it's time to lay down a healthy coat of black primer. I am using one-shot black primer by Ammo for this task. This stuff comes pre-mixed, so can be sprayed straight from the bottle. Starting with a completely black canvas isn't everybody's cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine. Everybody has their own way of tackling these projects. For me, however, I really like the black canvas approach. I think it's a useful way of gaining tone and shadows when painting the base layer. Whatever color you prime your models, it is a very important stage prior to painting, especially on resin, plastic, or metal parts. I keep going with the primer, ensuring the whole thing is thoroughly covered. Next up, it's time to add some grass. I'm using static grass for this task, but without an applicator. To get the grass to stand on end, first I separate the grass so it's not clumped together. Next, I apply a decent layer of PVA glue over the area I am going to be turfing. I spread the PVA with a palette knife until the whole area is covered. Now it's simply a case of grabbing small clumps with some tweezers and placing it onto the model. That process is repeated over and over to cover the grass areas. I also mix it up a bit by adding some small shrubs. I got these sets from AK Interactive, which I use on a lot of grassy scenes. I chop the end off and glue in place as I would the grass. I will add some taller plants later towards the end of the project. As well as this, I add some fine turf by Woodland Scenics. This gives some areas a mossy texture and stops the bank looking like a finely turfed garden. Then the repeat action continues. Every now and again I add some heavily diluted PVA water solution just to give some of the loose grass a better chance to hold on. Always remember to trust the process. It will look better once it dries and a hell of a lot better once painted. Whilst this process does take a while, it doesn't require a static grass applicator, of which can be expensive, and also gives you a lot of control over how thick you want the grass. I'm going for a fairly rough look. I want it to look semi-natural, rather than all standing on end like a tennis court. Onto the final patches of grass now. The rear of the wall has two grassy areas and also a patch in between the tire tracks. And that is the last stage for this video. Yes, it is looking a bit of a mess, but remember, trust the process. Next time will be the third and final part to the Diorama series, where we will be bringing this thing to life with a lick of paint. We will also add the final touches to the diorama, adding some random bits of steel, some wooden gates, and the party piece, the Panther itself. As always, thank you for watching, and happy modeling, everybody.